the Catholic Men's Podcast, helping you find good works of literature for the Catholic gentleman. Mysteries of Ships and Planes by Phyllis Emert. Mystery creates wonder, and wonder is the basis of man's desire to understand. Neil Armstrong. Can you discover the depths of God? Can you discover the limits of the Almighty? They are as high as the heavens. What can you do? Its measurement is longer than the earth and broader than the sea. The Book of Job. One. The Andy Letchemy, 1864. "Will you look at that, Captain?" said the first mate, who pointed to the northeast. "It's a waterspout and a queer-looking thing," declared the captain. "She's a huge one. I'd say about 10 miles away. Nothing to worry about, mate. We're going west and she's to the east." The captain went below deck to eat his breakfast and attend to some paperwork. Waterspouts are tornadoes at sea. Sometimes they happen in inland bodies of water, like lakes or rivers. The funnel-shaped cloud extends down to the surface, where heavy winds pick up the water and whirl it around at high speeds. The skipper of the Andy Letchemy, a 150-ton vessel, was transporting laborers from one city to another off the coast of British-occupied India. It was the morning of March 15, 1864, when the waterspout was first sighted. Sometime later, when the captain came back on deck, he was startled to see that the giant column of water was much closer. "Put her about," he shouted to the crew. "I want some distance between that thing and us." The Andy Letchemy changed directions, and so did the waterspout. "It's no use, Captain. It's following us," shouted the mate. "It's not possible," answered the skipper, who frantically began turning the ship away from its watery pursuer. But his efforts were in vain. Wherever the captain turned the Andy Letchemy, the waterspout seemed to follow. "It's like the thing is alive, Captain," screamed the panicked mate, "and hunting us down." In the end, the ship was sucked into the whirling column. It was lifted right out of the sea and then thrown into the shrieking, foamy water of the spout. The Andy Letchemy disappeared from sight instantly, gobbled up by the waterspout. All but 7 of the 134 souls who were on board went to their deaths. The 7 who escaped being sucked into the funnel were able to keep afloat by hanging on to pieces of the wreckage. Eventually, a passing ship rescued them from the sea. Some of the survivors claim the waterspout was an evil force which set out to destroy the Andy Letchemy. Others feel its strange movements were just a coincidence mixed with bad luck. Bad luck, or evil force, it will always be a mystery. Two. The CF-100, 1960. The airbase traffic controller watched his radar screen carefully. 2 Canadian jets were on a routine mission over Lake Ontario. They showed up as 2 blips on the lower portion of the screen. Reaching for some report forms on the next desk, the controller turned his head for an instant. A moment later, he stared back at the screen. One of the blips was gone. "Did you see that? It vanished off the screen," he said loudly. The other controllers had seen it too.
"This is CX-622 calling base control. I have a problem here," said the pilot. "This may be hard to believe, but my lead plane has just disappeared. Please confirm. Over."
"Base to CX-622. He's disappeared from our radar also. Try to give us a position where he may have gone down. Over." At first, it was thought that the plane had suddenly crashed. Perhaps it had unexpected mechanical problems. But why didn't the pilot signal he was having difficulty? It was September 1960. The two planes were CF-100 jets of the Canadian Armed Forces. As they flew across the sky through the clouds, the lead jet vanished into thin air. After the pilot confirmed that the plane had also disappeared on the radar screens, he circled back to search for it. Perhaps he could find a parachute where the airmen ejected from the plane. But nothing was found. There was no smoke, wreckage, or parachute. The only trace of the CF-100 was the streaks of condensed vapor left by all aircraft at high altitudes. And those streaks stopped suddenly where the plane had disappeared. The pilot returned to base, and rescue teams began to search the countryside for wreckage and witnesses. No one saw a plane go down, and nothing unusual was discovered on the ground. Next, they searched Lake Ontario, which is no deeper than 200 feet. If the CF-100 went down in the lake, it could easily be spotted. But nothing was found in the lake. The currents are mild, so wreckage and other remains of the plane wouldn't be carried away. The Canadian Defense Department closed the file on the missing airplane and its pilot, whereabouts unknown. 3. The Octavius, 1775. All through the night, gale-force winds tore at the whaling ship, Herald. Sailing from Greenland in 1775, the ship was in polar Arctic waters, traveling among the icebergs and ice floes. When the storm began, the crew was afraid they'd be trapped in the ice, but it passed, and finally the sun rose over the blinding white landscape. "Ship off to starboard," shouted the lookout excitedly as a vessel glided into view from behind an iceberg. "She's covered with ice," remarked her captain, as it came closer to the Herald. "No signs of life aboard," he said. He was able to read the name printed on the stern rear of the ship. "Ahoy, Octavius!" There was no answer. The ice made the ship sparkle in the bright sunlight. "Looks like a derelict. Let's board her," declared the captain. On the deck of the deserted ship, there was drifting snow everywhere, but no one in sight. The men went below deck after forcing open ice-sealed doors. In the crew's quarters, they discovered about 28 men, bundled up in clothing and blankets, frozen to death. The extreme cold had preserved the bodies so well that they looked very much like they did when they were alive. The crewmen of the Herald were uneasy. "Let's check the captain's quarters," said their skipper. They found the body of the captain of the Octavius still sitting at a table in his cabin. The ship's log lay before him with a pen near one hand. In a connecting cabin, the captain's wife lay dead in bed. Nearby, a man had frozen to death while trying to light a fire. The body of a young boy was found in a fur coat. The figures all seemed alive, and the crewmen were filled with fear. Captain Warren wanted to inspect the ship's cargo, but his crew was anxious to leave the eerie death ship as soon as possible. The captain took the ship's log as they hurriedly left and returned to the Herald. The crew watched in silence as the strange vessel drifted into the distance until they could no longer see it. From the log, Captain Warren found out that the Octavius left England for the Orient in 1761. The captain brought his wife and 10-year-old son along. There were 29 crewmen aboard. Apparently, they reached their destination and were returning to England in 1762. Keep in mind this is 1775 that they found this ship. Most ships traveled around Cape Horn at the lower tip of South America to get from the Pacific to the Atlantic Ocean. It was a long and often dangerous journey. The captain of the Octavius decided to look for a passageway home to England in the north, though others had tried but failed before him. If successful, It would save hundreds of miles and many weeks at sea, but it was a great risk. According to the log dated November 1762, the Octavius became locked in ice in the Arctic Ocean, north of what is now Alaska. At the time of the log entry, they had been trapped for 17 days and had no fire or warmth. The captain's son had died, and the crewmen were in poor condition and near death. The Herald came upon the Octavius in 1775 in the North Atlantic off Greenland, 13 years after the crew and passengers had frozen to death. The ship had broken free of the ice and drifted through the passageway its captain had hoped to find in 1762. Why did the captain take the risk of finding a Northwest Passage when others had failed? No one will ever know. The Octavius and its lifeless crew was never seen again. 4. Boelcke's Derlict, 1916. World War I was in full swing in September 1916. Dogfights between 2 or more fighter planes flying close to each other was a common sight. One dawn morning, 2 airmen from the Australian Flying Corps took off on a mission over no man's land, the battleground between the German armies and the British and French forces. Lieutenant Sandy, the pilot, and Sergeant Hughes, the wireless operator, were supposed to direct ground artillery to German positions. Suddenly, a squadron of German fighters came out of the clouds and attacked the Australians. 2 other planes came to their rescue, and there was a dogfight. One of the German planes was shot down, the others flew off. The 2 rescue planes waved goodbye to Sandy and Hughes and then went on their way. A short time later, Captain Oswald Boelcke, a top German pilot, was flying home to Germany after a dawn raid over France. 5 other German planes were with him, including Baron von Richthofen, who later was known as the Red Baron. Suddenly, a British plane flew out of the clouds directly at the Germans. The squadron scattered. One by one, the German pilots attacked the plane. They poured round after round of machine gun fire into the body of the aircraft and the cockpit where the crew sat. "Why are they holding the fire?" thought Boelcke to himself. "They just keep flying on." He waved his men off. "I'll finish the job myself." Boelcke swept down on the British plane, aimed his machine guns into the cockpit, and let loose with a burst of bullets. But still the plane flew on, apparently unaffected. Boelcke clearly saw his bullets go into the aircraft. "It's impossible," he thought. Slowly, the German ace flew closer to the mysterious airplane. Only a few yards separated them now. Boelcke stared into the cockpit. What he saw made him shiver with fear. There, strapped and sitting upright in their seats, were the dead bodies of Sandy and Hughes. They stared straight ahead as if they were still at the controls of the death plane. Boelcke flew along with them for a while, then he dipped his wings, saluted, and left to join the others. When they returned home, Boelcke wrote about the incident in his flight report. He believed the men were already dead when they flew out of the clouds. A month later, Boelcke died in combat. What happened to the death plane? It flew on for almost an hour until it ran out of fuel. It silently glided forward and, by some mysterious force of its own, made a smooth landing in a field in France. French soldiers carried the dead bodies to a nearby hospital. Doctors found that both men had been killed by a bullet which first went through Hughes' chest and then came to a stop in Sandy's brain. They had died in an instant and were dead for more than an hour when the plane landed. The aircraft itself was full of bullet holes, yet not one shot had hit the propeller, engine, or gas tank. How did the plane with 2 dead men at the controls make it home from enemy territory? How was it able to land safely? No one knows. 5. The Mary Celeste, 1872. Some sailors believe that certain ships are just born unlucky. The Mary Celeste was one of these. Many called her a jinx ship. Built in 1861, the 103 two-masted British sailing ship was originally named the Amazon. Her captain died shortly after taking command. On her first voyage, she damaged her hull. While being repaired, a fire broke out. During an Atlantic crossing, she collided with another ship. By this time, the unlucky Amazon had had 4 captains. In 1867, she ran aground off Nova Scotia. Her ownership changed hands several times. After being repaired and sold to an American, her name was changed to Mary Celeste. Many sailors refused to serve on the Mary Celeste. They felt it was unlucky to change a ship's name. The 282-ton vessel switched owners several more times. Finally, a Mr. Benjamin Briggs became her captain and part owner. The Mary Celeste was due to sail from New York Harbor on November 5, 1872. She carried a cargo of 1,700 barrels of alcohol and was bound for Genoa, Italy. Briggs's friend, Captain David Morehouse of the Dei Grazia, was headed for Gibraltar. The two had dinner together and wished each other well. 2 days later, Briggs set sail, followed by Morehouse in the Dei Grazia the next week. Captain Briggs brought along his wife, Sarah, and his baby daughter. He was an experienced skipper, looking forward to an uneventful journey. On December 5th, the two ships met 600 miles from Portugal in the mid-Atlantic. "Ship off the port bow!" shouted the lookout on the Dei Grazia. Captain Morehouse took a look with his eyeglasses. "Why, it's the Mary Celeste," he declared, "and there's no one at the wheel or on deck." Some of her sails appeared torn, and the ship looked out of control. Morehouse sent over a boarding party who searched the vessel thoroughly. They had disturbing news. Not a soul was on board. The Mary Celeste was deserted. The cargo was in place, but one of the containers had been opened. The lifeboat was missing. The crew must have left in a hurry in the boat, since they hadn't taken their personal belongings with them. In the captain's cabin, the strongbox was still locked. The last entry in the log was dated November 24th and recorded the ship's position as 110 miles west of the Azores. The captain's bed was unmade. Some toys and sewing articles were found. A bottle of medicine was opened with the spoon nearby. There was plenty of food and drinking water in the galley, a 6-month supply. There was nothing wrong with the ship itself. She was completely seaworthy and in good condition. There were no signs of violence or robbery anywhere. The only thing missing from the Mary Celeste was the ship's papers and some navigation books and equipment. Captain Morehouse decided to claim the Mary Celeste as salvage and towed her into the port at Gibraltar. During the Admiralty Court investigation which followed, some suspected Captain Morehouse of foul play. They felt murder had been committed, so he could collect the salvage money. But the naval court cleared Morehouse and his men from any wrongdoing. The court never did reach a conclusion as to what happened to the crew of the Mary Celeste. In the years that passed, the mystery grew and facts were changed to add a touch of drama to the story. Actually, there were no tables set with uneaten food on board. Coffee and tea were not discovered steaming in their cups. There was no blood-stained sword, and no page of the logbook was missing. Some believed that the Mary Celeste was attacked by a giant squid or octopus, which plucked each person off the ship one by one. Others felt that all were drowned while watching a swimming race around the ship between the captain and the mate. They had been sitting on a platform under the bow, and it collapsed into the water. Still others insisted that the crew had drunk the alcohol, gone crazy, and killed everyone on board. The Mary Celeste was in good condition apart from some torn sails, so a terrible storm or the fear of sinking wasn't the reason for abandoning the ship. 3 facts stand out. 1. The ship was abandoned quickly. 2. They left in the lifeboat. 3. They took navigation equipment and the ship's papers with them. The most likely answer to the mystery of the Mary Celeste concerns her cargo of alcohol. Perhaps the barrels gave off fumes, and Captain Briggs feared the ship would explode since alcohol burns so easily. He might have ordered all hands, including his family, into the lifeboat to see what would happen. When Briggs decided to return to the ship, a wind came up, blowing the Mary Celeste far away from the boat. The crew rowed and rowed, but they couldn't catch up with the ship. All 10 aboard were stranded far from land and were eventually swamped by rough waves. It may have happened this way, but can never be proven. The story doesn't end in 1873. The Mary Celeste was sold again and continued to sail under other captains. Finally, in 1884, Captain Gilman Parker wrecked the ship on a coral reef near Haiti for the insurance money. When it didn't break up, he burned it to the ground. But Parker was never allowed to collect the money. He died 8 months later in poverty. 6. Flight 19, 1945. The mysterious disappearance of Flight 19 has been called the Mary Celeste of the sky. At 2:10 p.m. on December 5, 1945, 5 single-engine Avenger torpedo bombers took off from the Naval Air Station at Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was a routine training patrol scheduled to last about 2 hours. The planes were supposed to fly 56 miles east to practice low-level bombing runs. Then they would fly north 73 miles over Grand Bahama Island, and finally 120 miles west back to Fort Lauderdale. The 5 planes carried 14 men. Lieutenant Charles Taylor was the instructor on the flight. All but 2 of the crew were students in training. The Avengers had self-inflating life rafts, and each man wore a life jacket. 5 hours after they took off, the pilots and their planes vanished without a trace. Years later, it was reported that the flight leader said, "Everything is wrong. Strange. We can't be sure of any direction. Even the ocean doesn't look as it should." A rescue plane, a Martin Mariner flying boat with a crew of 13, was part of the search team. That's the same plane my grandfather flew. It, too, disappeared without a trace. One naval officer was reported to have said, "They vanished as completely as if they'd flown to Mars. We don't know what's going on out there." Some said that all 6 planes were victims of the mysterious area of water known as the Bermuda Triangle. Perhaps UFOs or strange unearthly forces were responsible for their disappearance. But many of these quotes, according to this book, were false. Taylor never said, "The ocean doesn't look as it should." A Navy officer didn't say anything about Mars. What really was said is noted in the Navy investigation report on the incident. About 1.5 hours into the flight, one of the training pilots said, "I don't know where we are. We must have got lost after that last turn." Later, Taylor said, "Both my compasses are out. I'm sure I'm in the Keys. I don't know how to get to Fort Lauderdale." Taylor was advised to try to fly north. Then he replied, "I know where I am now. Don't come after me." At about 5:15 p.m., radio contact began to fade, and Taylor was asked to switch to the emergency frequency channel. He refused, saying, "I can't change frequency. I must keep my planes intact." Then Taylor told the pilots to keep flying in formation. If any one plane had to ditch, they would ditch together. The 5 planes only had enough fuel to last until 8 p.m. After dark, the weather turned very rough, Meanwhile, the Miami Coast Guard and other communication centers were trying to pinpoint their position. Until they had a position to fix on the missing aircraft, the Navy didn't want to send a rescue plane out in the dark in bad weather. At 6 p.m., the Calm Gulf Sea Frontier Evaluation Center in Miami computed a general position for Flight 19 from radio messages overheard. They were actually east of Florida and hundreds of miles north of the Bahamas. Taylor had mistakenly thought he was over the Florida Keys. By flying north, he was over the Atlantic when he thought he was over the Gulf of Mexico. At around 6:15, Taylor was heard to say to the other pilots, "I suggest we fly due east until we run out of gas. We have a better chance of being picked up close to shore." Actually, Taylor was flying deeper into the Atlantic and away from the shore, but no one tried to tell him of his actual position once it was known. Two-way communication was very bad, and the signal was fading in and out. The last message from any of the pilots on Flight 19 was at 7:04 p.m. Rescue planes took to the air around that time. One of them, a Martin Mariner, disappeared suddenly and could not be contacted. A ship, the SS Gaines Mill, reported seeing a plane catch fire, and then a flaming explosion at sea in the area where the Martin Mariner was supposed to be. They spotted a large oil slick and debris, but couldn't retrieve the wreckage because of the rough sea. The next day, a full-scale search began involving hundreds of ships and planes. After 5 days, no wreckage, debris, or bodies from Flight 19 could be found. If Taylor's compasses were out, he wouldn't have known what direction he had been flying or which way to go. Whether the student pilot's compasses were working is not known, but Taylor thought he was over the Florida Keys when he was really far off course. The actions he took only seemed to add to his confusion. He and the rest of the men were totally lost, and they couldn't seem to find a way out of the situation. If Taylor had switched to the emergency frequency channel, two-way communication would have been clear, but he was afraid that one or more of the other planes wouldn't be able to pick up the new frequency, and he would lose contact with them. Flight 19 kept trying to find their way home, but they eventually ran out of fuel. Together they ditched into a very rough and stormy sea. The Avenger could stay afloat for only 15 to 20 seconds. In total darkness, with icy sea water pouring in, the men would have had to escape from the plane, pull the raft from its compartment, jump away from the sinking plane, and inflate the raft. It's possible that the planes quickly sank along with the bodies and any debris from the craft, especially in such stormy weather. By the next morning, when the full-scale search began, not a trace of Flight 19 was left. The Martin Mariner rescue plane carried almost 2,000 gallons of fuel. It apparently exploded in the air, as witnessed by those aboard the Gaines Mill. There are still unanswered questions about Flight 19. Why didn't the Navy send several rescue planes out sooner to cover a number of possible search areas? Perhaps they could have established clearer radio contact with the lost flight and been able to pinpoint their position sooner. Why didn't anyone contact Taylor and attempt to give him their actual position once it was known? If Taylor had known at 6 p.m. that they were east of Florida and so far north, he might have turned toward shore with 2 hours of fuel still left. One thing is known for sure. On December 5th, 1945, the men of Flight 19 flew into aviation history forever. 7. The Red Baron, 1940. In 1940, during World War II, the German Luftwaffe Air Force sent endless numbers of planes across the English Channel from occupied France to bomb London. It was called the Blitzkrieg, Lightning War. Night after night, the Germans dropped their bombs over the British city. But the English never gave up, They survived the death and destruction. With the help of America's entrance into the war in 1941, they went on to victory over the Nazis. During the Blitz, a young RAF Royal Air Force fighter pilot was on his first night patrol over English shores. His name was Grayson. The weather was clear in some areas and cloudy in others. The water in the channel below was choppy, and the wind blew off and on, scattering the clouds. It was a gloomy night, and Grayson felt totally alone. Suddenly, out of the clouds, he saw what appeared to be a single airplane. A German plane, he thought to himself, and sped up to catch it. The other plane swung away, heading across the channel towards France. "Oh, no, you don't, Adolf," said Grayson, who increased his speed. Suddenly, the enemy plane flew into the clear, and, in the moonlight, Grayson saw that the aircraft was marked with black crosses. Definitely German markings, thought Grayson. But wait a minute. He shook his head, not believing what he saw. This couldn't be a Luftwaffe plane. It looks like something from the history books. The plane was dark red, had 3 wings, each on top of the other. It's a triplane from the First War, he thought in shock, and it's flying faster than I am. That's impossible. Grayson rubbed his eyes. Nobody will believe this, he thought. When he looked again, it was raining and difficult to see. Seconds later, the cloudburst ended, but the strange plane had disappeared. I must have been imagining all this, he said out loud. Could I have dozed off for a moment and dreamed it? Grayson shrugged it off, turned back, and completed his patrol. Later, on the ground, after a few drinks with the other pilots, Grayson told the story of what had happened. Incredible, isn't it? He laughed, but everyone in the room was strangely quiet. You could hear a pin drop. What is it? He asked. Did I say the wrong thing? Finally, one of the older veteran pilots spoke up. Nothing's wrong, lad. You finally met the Red Baron, that's all. Some call him the Red Knight. Who is he? Grayson questioned. He's the ghost of Baron von Richthofen, explained the pilot, the #1 German fighter pilot of World War I. He was killed in 1918, though they don't know exactly how it happened. My own father flew against the Baron over 20 years ago, declared another pilot. We've all seen him. Welcome to the club, Grayson. They raised their glasses. A toast to the Red Baron. Grayson gulped down his drink. Dead now for 22 years, he thought to himself. When the war ended in 1945, the Red Baron was never seen again. There's a lot of other mysteries of ships and planes in this book, but it's pretty late in the night now, and I think I'd better wrap it up. Let me know if y'all liked this podcast, and I'll do a part 2. Thank you all so much for listening, and as always, Godspeed. Hurdy-gurdy music by Andrei Vinogradov. Link in the description.